I graduated from Colorado State University, CSU Vet School, in 1979, and it has a very good equine repro program, and that's where I got into breeding horses. And then I moved to the Central California area, coastal California, Monterey Bay, just south of San Francisco Bay area in 1981. And I did know that area from pony club rallies. I used to go to them as a kid, and they were great fun, and they were all in that area, so I loved the area. It was beautiful. I bred my first horse in 1982, and that was a Dutch Warmblood cross, Taxator with a borrowed thoroughbred mare. Taxator was imported by a group of friends of Jeff Moore and Liz Searle, who picked him out in Holland. And when I first saw Taxi move, I had never seen anything like it, and I thought, wow, this is a different sort of horse, and I was hooked on the Dutch Warmbloods from then on. Just spectacular movers. Between 1982 and 1986, I made about twice yearly trips to Holland and imported 6 mares myself for breeding. I financed my trips by setting up a quarantine station for the 2-day blood testing in those days at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and would fly back with horses from Holland, mainly that Jeff and Liz had picked out for their students. So that's how I got my horses financed, is through flying back with other people's horses, and my own when I bought them. So that lasted until the CEM quarantine that raised the price of importing breeding age horses 2 and older greatly, and I stopped importing at that point. So that was in 86, my last horses came in. In 87, I moved to where I now live, in San Juan Bautista, which is famous for its California missions, founded by the Franciscan missionaries in the late 1700s. And I'm in a rolling hills just south of town, and Lio means horse in Hawaiian, and Lomas means hills in Spanish. So that's how I came up with that name, combining the two. My ideas about breeding. I love sayings and platitudes, so you'll hear a lot of them. And there are several that I try to keep in mind regarding breeding. In vet school, there was a saying, it was called the KISS principle, K-I-S-S. And that means keep it simple, stupid. And the saying, when you hear hoofbeats, look for horses, not zebras, was also a favorite. And that means look for the obvious, don't look for the extremely rare things. My other favorite phrases are function over fashion, handsome is as handsome does, know what to look at and know what to look for, which applies to any kind of evaluation or breeding or judging that you're doing, not just in horses, but anything. Any kind, not even just sports. Could be plants. So that is a great phrase, to know what you're looking at and what you're looking for when you're looking at it. Other principles I try to follow are don't double up on faults, really match the mares to the stallions, as Dan was saying, and where one is weaker, the other needs to be stronger. That is. And keeping these things in mind, the things to decide on, firstly, is what are you breeding for? What discipline? Then what characteristics are important to you for that discipline? And then thirdly, what do people want who are in that discipline? The buyer, since mostly you're going to be selling those horses, you might keep some hopefully for your own breeding, but you can't keep them all unless you're hardly breeding at all. So I'm mainly a dressage breeder, using a variety of bloodlines, not only the dressage horses, or the riding horses with dressage bloodlines. I mix the 3 types of KWPN horses, gelders, both types of riding horses, the jumpers and the dressage horses, and then in the last 6 years, the harness horses, mainly one that I did end up buying. On the harness horses, I have a lot of harness horses in some of my pedigrees, and the main thing about them is you want one that's very good for dressage breeding, particularly behind. So the harness horses have a lot of hackney in them, but that's okay as long as they don't produce the hackney movement, which is of course what they want in the harness horses, but not what you want in the dressage horses. So I'm a crossbreeder, and mainly with the gelders and dressage horses, but also using some jumper lines and toy card or harness horse lines that are suitable. I also line breed a lot. And that's what inbreeding with a certain individuals, so certain bloodlines. When one inbreeds, you're concentrating the genes of that individual, both good and bad. So you want to use a really good individual to line breed on. I prefer that individual to be back a couple of generations, not super close up, although my harness horse stallion has super close up. But then I'm using him to the next principle is outcrossing. Because with the harness horse, he's totally unrelated, or almost totally unrelated, to any of my other mares, So when you breed totally unrelated, different types of horses, you're crossbreeding, and you can often get almost, well, it's not a true hybrid vigor, like for a genetic term, but it's a similar effect, that the offspring can just be incredibly fabulous. And so my harness horse, I just mentioned his name, is Bruiser. I didn't name him that, and I can't change his name either. I don't like it. But since he's had offspring, he has to stay with that name. And he's actually line bred on Fabricius, who was one of the top harness horses. And Fabricius' sire is Renovo, who again was probably the top harness horse of his age, generation. And but he did, Renovo himself was like Cambridge Cole, who was a hackney. So he does have a lot of hackney in him, but you don't see that in the movement. And then on the more gelder side, would be considered gelders now. I think in his day he was considered a jumper. He did jump as what he did professionally, is the horse Formateur, which is Fossmeyer's sire. And he's got German breeding, really, mainly, and his sire and grandsire are also in a mare, which is Eiselmare, my approved gelder stallion mother, Cadenza, had the same grandsire on her mother's side, and that is Polaris Porter and Polaris. I think were full brothers, and they're both bipolar first. So that's on both sides of Eiselmare's and his full sister Gisela, who is one of my Mareline's pedigrees. So they're line bred, and then my other, another very good Mareline is out of a mare named Odessa. That's a pure gelders, would be considered pure gelders now. A Commandant times Norman, but then Commandant also has Norman on his mother's side, so she is line bred on Norman, who's a gorgeous, old-fashioned Holsteiner stallion. And I always thought, wow, this is wonderful. She really looks like Norman. But at the time, I didn't realize that's because she's double Norman. She's got it on both sides. So line breeding can be very useful if it's on good individuals. So for the outcrossing, though, that's when you're breeding, as I say, unrelated bloodlines to get a hybrid vigor type effect. And that's what I'm doing with the toy card, the harness horse, cross with the gelders or dressage horse to produce a sort of in-between kind of horse. And they really do kind of come out in between, but with really amazingly good motion. More than most regular, even good dressage horses have. So I do occasionally get a good jumper. I do use jumper lines also. And I also have produced some 3-day horses and even a couple of hunters. But what I'm looking for is mainly dressage. And what I am looking for is, a horse that has a talent for the FEI levels, but with a character for the amateur, with good trainability and willingness to perform. In this country, I think that might be more emphasized than it is in Holland, although they're looking for good characters and they do test their characters at the stallion testing and all that. But here we have so many more amateurs buying horses than they do in Holland, and also, showing them often to high levels. So we really, here I think, pay more attention to the we love it if a good professional will buy some of our horses, that's wonderful. But really, at least in my case, it's mainly amateurs that are buying. So I really have to pay attention to the horse's character, because that's what they want. And as it seems like the population gets older, obviously we all are, as the people are getting in their 40s and 50s and 60s, they really want a good character. They do not want to get dumped by something. So I call it the 3 T's. You're looking for talent, temperament, and trainability. At Currings, the in-hand and free movement classes highlight the conformation and movement, but it is the under-saddle classes that are what really count, because they highlight the rideability, the trainability, and the willingness to perform. So I'm really glad that the Currings these days have many more riding classes than we used to have back in the early days, because it's the bottom line, it's the performance. As most of you know, I was a jury member for the Currings in North America for over 20 years. And as well as on the board of directors for almost that long. So I went to a lot of Currings, saw a lot of horses, and as all our jury members do, we follow the KWP guidelines for how to judge at Currings. In my own mind, though, I take a little different tact. To me, conformation is only important in how it affects the ability to perform. Handsome is as handsome does. Think about it. It is the performance that counts, and conformation doesn't cause the movement, genetics do. But conformation is important for things that affect performance. So what we're talking about is it takes a long time to reach the top levels of performance, especially in dressage. And the things that conformation affects are the training issues and the soundness issues, both very important. The affecting training issues are things like an uphill build with very good connections of the entire top line from pole to croup, which can transmit the power and energy from behind in balanced proportion between the forehand, middle, and hindquarters. The length of leg and the length of leg need to be in proportion to the body. Balance is the name of the game in dressage. You have already heard that also in the hunters. They're really emphasizing that. Things that affect soundness can be faults or injuries in the top line, but more commonly involve the legs and feet. Things we all know are important, like size and balance of hooves. As Dan said, no hoof, no horse. And that is certainly true. And the angles of the joints in the legs, as seen from the front and from the back and side, really are important. So you are evaluating conformation quite a lot, but to me, conformation has very little to do with movement. It has much more to do with trainability and soundness. Obviously, if a horse is really downhill, that's probably going to affect its movement. But it's the genetics of the horse, the bloodlines of the horse that determine the movement to me. More than conformation, I'm sure we'll all see absolutely gorgeous looking horses that then can't move it out of a paper sack. They just can't move. But regarding movement, dressage movement, I think what captures what I think of, I'm looking for, I say lofty action, soaring, climbing the sky, rising in front like a plane taking off from the first step upwards. Articulating, reach, scope, and uphillness equals lofty. Balance is the name of the game. Uphill balance. Carriage and posture are all important. It requires the power from behind and the stepping under to create that carriage and posture. Lastly, they need to have the presence, what I call the look of the eagles. Balance, carriage, posture, and strength from behind that they can look around, basically surveying their realm without missing a stride. Every beat and step the same. It is regal. It's the genetics that makes the movement. You can produce movement through breeding, not just through training. You're way better off if they have it naturally. And that still surprises a lot of people that aren't that familiar with warmbloods. They thought, oh, thought you had to train them to do that. No, they can have it naturally, and you're light years ahead when they do. Other things, as in all disciplines, that you look for are agility and suppleness, just like the hunters. And in character, I look for braveness and heart. In other words, not just the willingness to do what you say, but to have the desire to perform. So to me, performance is where it's at. That is dressage. So that's the first part of my talk. Now we go on to bloodlines. As I said, I imported 6 mares myself in the 80s. I'm going to talk about 3 of them that have had very many folks. One was Utopia, and she's Fresco, which is a Rhinelander. Porter, again, as I said, is Polar first, Ferdinand. And I picked her out in Holland. I saw Fresco, he was showing Grand Prix there. And I picked her out, and I thought, you know, this is really a nice mare, and she really, really looks like the stallion. So I thought, that's got to be a good sign. So I imported her. She wasn't full. Unfortunately, she aborted almost like within a month after she arrived. That's when I learned, don't import them if they're not like 5 months pregnant. I think she was 3.5 or something, and unfortunately lost it. But I bred her to Taxator and got the mare Cadenza. Now Cadenza then has the double, no, not Cadenza, she has the Porter. And Eiselmere has the double polar first, because Fossmeyer also, you can see it up here, you can't probably read it at all because it's in dark, but Formateur is by Polaris, who is by Polar first. And then Fossmeyer's Dam is by Epihone, who's one of the Amor sons. You know, Amor, a lot of people considered him the foundation sire of the modern Dutch riding horse, and he had 3 great sons the E years, Epihone, Eros, and Écrasite. So whenever I see those 3 E stallions, I always want to look closely at that horse. Amor, as probably a lot of you also know, was considered extremely talented himself, but not the easiest horse to ride. So some of his offspring, even though they had the talent, maybe didn't quite have the temperament that in those days, that type of riding they were doing could allow them to reach the upper levels. But you still see a lot of Amor back in both mares and stallions. He was a good horse. And he was also a Holsteiner, so you can see there's a lot of Holsteiner. And then Dutch Warmbloods, not just the jumpers like we think these days, they got a lot of Holsteiners, but back in the gelders too, and the riding horses. So anyway, Eiselmere, probably some of you remember anyway, he's over there on the right. He had many, many offspring. I still have like 7 of his daughters, I think, that I used as brood mares. But he went Grand Prix. He won at every level with Chelsea Sibley, sitting right here. And just won everything, every level, pretty much. He was amazing, and he loved to perform. In fact, he was at his best. The bigger the crowd, the more action going on, the better he was. And he was brave. He never spooked or shied in the ring. He was he just had the greatest time. And Chelsea had a good time too, I think. Chelsea has had many, and I'm sorry she's not even speaking. She will be riding her own stallion, Grand Prix, stallion coming up Grand Prix. But she's had many top Grand Prix horses and interesting bloodlines. Anyway, so she rode him. She also rode my other stallion, here it is, Lauer's mare, who is by Gisela, so the same as Eiselmere, but out of the stallion Farmer, who was Voltaire Amor. So I like the Amors. I said, and I actually like Farmer. I mean, he had a few faults he had to watch for, but he actually produced good horses, I thought. And then Gisela actually had a bunch of them. She just has one there, Napua by Zeoli. Actually, Napua, one of her last foals was UB40 that Patty Mayer has in California, who is a stallion, a very nice one. He's beginning to show now, so you'll be seeing him if you're in California. He's an L stallion. Let's see, so let's go on to the next slide since we don't have any more listed there. There's a bunch of them under those. I don't know what generation I'm on, probably the 6th or something like that. I mean, we just go on and on, right? Okay, now this is an interesting line. This is Abilene is the mare I imported, this one over here. And she's by a toy cart, a driving horse, Indian, who is by Oregon. Now, Oregon is considered the foundation sire of the harness horses. So Indian really goes back to the old lines. But I saw Indian and I saw his offspring in Holland, and you could just pick them out. They were fabulous, fabulous dressage movers. So I wanted an Indian mare, and this one I got. Actually, someone was mentioning Nick Lizer. That's who I got it from. He didn't breed her, but he went and picked her out and showed her to me. Ufrat goes back to the old line of Commandant, and then Camper is back to the old line in the Friesland and also the Groningen. So great old bloodlines in that mare, and she was a producer too. She just had fabulous babies. Her first one was a Toile, and that was by Zolo. I imported her in full to Zolo. So that was her first. And then Tatiana is an Isomer daughter of a Toile that I have, and she has a very nice 2-year-old, coming 2-year-old. But these are the other ones. This is probably the most prolific, and I would consider probably the best horse I ever bred as far as a mare. Holly Kulani by Fossmeyer. You can see I love the Fossmeyer line. And she's had many offsprings. Uwalani, Venezia, full sisters. I often keep full sisters if I like them. Because I think, well, that's good bloodline, and I'll see how they produce and which one's better of those two. And she's produced a Grand Prix horse named Dacre. She's produced a Grand Prix horse that's Deja Vu. Both of those were trained by, and still are, by Stacy Polliner, who couldn't make it. She was going to come. And it just goes on and on and on. Mini lines. Another one up here, I don't have here, is Junior times Holly Kulani, is a mare, Olina Lani, who again, like her mother, and this is where it comes to the best mares, like Dan was saying. You really got to go with the mares. The really, really good, strong producing mares. And you can bring them to any nice stallion, you're going to get a great offspring. You can't say it vice versa. You can have a great stallion, but you can't just bring to any nice mare and get a good offspring. Or yeah, really good offspring. But Holly Kulani always produced fabulously. She has a lot of other Grand Prix horses. And her daughter, Olina Lani, also. Every single one of them were fabulous movers. So, I'm not going to go through all the whole long list of everybody because it goes down and down and down and down forever. But a really wonderful old-time line that produced and is still producing through her offspring. All right, Odessa. That's this mare here. An old mare I imported, who is Commandant again. That's Wachmeister de Lavazzion. Old time, and considered pure gelders these days. And mother was by the Holsteiner Normand. And the interesting thing is, Commandant's mother is also by Normand. So she's a very close bred of Normand. And that's why she looked like Normand. I thought, oh, her mother must have been really strong because the Normand mare, because Odessa looks like Normand. But she was line bred for sure. And her most famous, unfortunately, I only got 2 offspring out of her, and then with the third one, she was like 8 months pregnant, and she colic bagged and twisted and lost her in the fall. So that's very sad. But so she only had this one filly. And fairly well, who has produced and produced and produced and produced her whole life. I still have one left, her daughter, Savar Fair by Rubenstein. And I bred, when I started breeding, I bred with frozen semen, and I bred pretty much with Osherly's stallions as well. So with fresh semen, that was Taxator. Not so much with him after Cadenza, because I already had that line through Isomer. But then a lot with Fossmeyer and a lot with Rubenstein, which is Holsteiner again. Back to Lady Killer, the jumper. So, but he had a great ability for Grand Prix design as well. It was really interesting. But so fairly well by Fossmeyer out of Odessa, produced Savoir, but full siblings of Savoir. I think they're like 3 Grand Prix dressage horses. One was world rank and one at Devon with Sherry Criswell. She's not here. She used to live in California and she moved back to Wellington now. But she had like 4 full siblings of Savoir Fairs. She just loved them and they always performed for her. And then Savoirs had Donatelli Aloha that won big time Grand Prix here in California for the young rider of Sherry Criswell used, and is now winning in Florida too, in Wellington. Sherry saw them, and then the new owners in Wellington is showing them there. And then Savoir she also has, since she loves that line so much, she also has like 4 offspring of Savoir Fairs. She had like 4 fairies. Now she's got 4 offspring, and they're all younger. 2 UB40s from her, and actually she has about 4 UB40s total. She likes UB, and I like UB too. But then, you know, it's really interesting because you look at UB and say, well, that's, you know, Jazz grandson, you know, that's not no gelders, no nothing. He has a lot of gelders in him. When you look at Actaeon, you look at Olivie, he's got Actaeon in him, and then you go back to Farn, and of course Farn's Holsteiner, sire of Nemador, and but nowadays is considered more gelders because he's very old-fashioned. So it's a shame when Yubi died. But anyway, I had other bloodlines, but I wanted to mention these 3 because they're probably the most prolific of my mares. But I also had an Eros mare that I wanted an Eros mare because I loved Amorn and those 3 D stallions. And they were always so gorgeous, those Eros mares. So I had an Eros mare, and I also had a former tour mare who produced quite well with Rubenstein, and I had several of that cross, and one of the daughters produced one of the top jumpers in the U.S. That was Paco Nani, ridden by, and then later bought by Richard Spooner, who then took him to Europe and won a lot there too. So the bloodlines are very versatile, I find. You know, it's not, they're, you know, excellent movers, so they mainly go to dressage. But it is very interesting how so many of them can also jump. And even the toy part offspring can jump. I think maybe Liz will talk about that a little bit tomorrow. So, you know, it's not just that they have to do this one discipline like Werner's horse, that's all they can do. If you get the right one, they can do a lot else too. So I'm not going to go through all those other ones. If anyone has questions, please ask. I also had a half-thoroughbred mare I imported by the name of Astra. And let's see, so those 3, the Formator, the Eros, and she was by Africana. So she was a half-thoroughbred, which I never thought I would import from Holland, a half-thoroughbred, because I was totally used to the thoroughbreds over here. I had thoroughbreds and part thoroughbreds all my life. But she could move, and she was gorgeous, so I did buy her. But she had at the bottom side a commandant. So the same, here again, same commandant as in Odessa's. Questions? No? All right.